All right, everyone, we're going to go ahead and get started. So we will be recording the presentation today. Sometime within the next 2 weeks, we will be posting a copy of the presentation on our website. So if at the end you want to go back and review the information again, it will be available online. If you have any questions, please use the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen. Amanda Jacober with the Grants Management section will be monitoring the chat box this morning. She may answer some questions during the presentation in the chat box, but we will also be reading them out loud at the end of the presentation so everyone can hear the answers. My name is Aiden Dicknight, and I am the Outdoor Recreation Grants Planner at Missouri State Parks for the Recreational Trails Program. This is the 2025 Recreational Trails Program Grant Application Workshop. What is the Recreational Trails Program, or RTP, as it will be referred to here today? The RTP is a federal pass-through grant funded by the Federal Highway Administration and administered in Missouri by the Missouri Department of Natural Resources, Division of State Parks, Grants Management Section. It was first created by the Intermodal Surface Transportation Efficiency Act of 1991 and has been through several authorizations since then. The RTP is currently operating under the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, Infrastructure Investment and Job Act. Funding for the RTP comes out of the Federal Highway Trust Fund. Specifically, it is a federal tax dollars used for non-highway recreation. The funding is dedicated to the development of recreational trails and trail-related facilities such as trailheads, parking lots, etc. Missouri has had RTP funding for over 25 years. This map shows the geographic distribution of the funds statewide up to the 2016 projects. To date, RTP has awarded over $28 million in funding and more than 360 projects statewide. So who can apply? The Recreational Trails Program funds a broad range of applicants. Applicants can include local and state governments, public and private schools, including colleges and universities, and not-for-profit organizations like trail clubs, land trust, and youth groups. Federal agencies are allowed to apply for motorized funding only. All applicants who apply for funding must be able to commit to having the trail project open and available for public use for a minimum of 25 years. RTP is a matching grant program. The federal share, or the amount that you can request, is up to a maximum of 80% of the total project cost, which means that you are required to contribute a minimum of 20% match. You can provide more than 20% match, but it is not required. Your match can be all cash or a combination of cash and in-kind contributions, such as volunteer labor, in-house labor, or in-house use of equipment. Also, you can use donations as part of your match, like labor, equipment, etc. This is a reimbursable program, which means that the cost must be incurred prior to receiving a reimbursement. Frequent reimbursements are encouraged. The maximum amount in grant funding that can be requested is $250,000, and the minimum is $25,000. The 2025 RTP apportionment will be about $1.3 million. What projects are eligible for RTP? On page 1 of the OPSP, there's a detailed list of projects that are eligible. I've listed a few here: construction of new recreational trails, construction of trailside amenities such as overlooks on the trail, trash receptacles, signage, trailhead facilities including parking areas and restrooms or items that are directly related to the trail could be RTP funded, and trail connectors, acquisition of land or right-of-way of easements, and restoration and repair of existing recreational trails. The funding can be used to rent or lease equipment that will be needed for your trail construction or rehabilitation. Equipment maintenance and the purchase of trail equipment may be eligible if it is used for the sole purpose of trail rehabilitation, maintenance, and construction. Funding can also be used for the assessment of trail conditions for accessibility and maintenance when it is part of a construction project. Now to talk about some of the projects that are not eligible for RTP funding. Federal Highways has determined that the following kinds of projects are inconsistent with RTP legislation. We are just going to talk about some of the most common ineligible projects. RTP funds should not be used to provide paths or sidewalks along or adjacent to public roads or streets unless the path or sidewalk is needed to complete a missing link between other recreational trails. Improvements to roads and/or bridges intended to be generally accessible by low clearance passenger vehicles, unless these roads or bridges are specifically designated for recreational trail use by the managing agency. RTP funds cannot be used for condemnation of any kind of interest in property. If a project proposal is solely for the purpose of trail planning, this would not be eligible. But if trail planning is a relatively small portion of an overall trail project, it may be allowable. A project proposal for the purpose of performing a trail feasibility study would not be eligible. Here is the link to the Federal Highways RTP website with guidance about the RTP. So how do you apply? The first step is the one that everyone is doing today, which is to attend a grant application workshop. The second step is completing the application and submitting the application to the grants management section by mailing 2 paper copies to the address at the bottom of the application form. The forms cannot be emailed. The application must be postmarked or received by March 3rd, 2025. Please don't let the questions in the application overwhelm you. If you don't understand how to answer a question, step 1 is to read the instructions in the guide, and step 2 is to call. So what happens after you send in your application and all of your supporting documentation? After all the applications have been received, we prepare a packet containing all the applications that are eligible for scoring and send the documentation to the Missouri Trails Advisory Board. This is a citizen advisory board made up of 8 members. Board members are selected for their trail expertise and represent 8 different types of trail use, like equestrian, off-highway motorcycle, water trails, mountain biking, and bicycling trails. The board members will take a look at your application individually and score it based on the criteria listed on the score sheet at the end of the OPSP. The grant application guide explains how the points are allocated to each section. After scoring all of the applications, the board is scheduled to convene on March 12th, 2025, to discuss the merits of each application and prepare a list of the projects recommended for funding. The grants management section will submit the list to our division director for preliminary approval. Once we get division approval, we contact the applicants of the projects that have been preliminarily selected to conduct our risk assessment to evaluate your capability of complying with the requirements of the grant. Also, we will schedule a pre-approval site inspection to verify that everything in the application is as it was described. Once we complete the pre-approval site inspection and risk assessments, we will put together a list of the projects recommended for funding to send to our division and department directors for approval. We will also send the list of projects to Federal Highways for their preliminary approval. The notice of award, project agreements, and regret letters will be sent to the applicants in the fall, typically in October. At this time, applicants of the project that have been awarded will be invited to attend a mandatory grant administration workshop where we will discuss oversight and management of the project, as well as long-term stewardship requirements. After you attend the mandatory workshop, we will send you a letter with your first notice to proceed with phase 1 of your project, and then you have 3 years to complete your project from start to finish. We have a game called RTP Opoly, and this sort of shows how the process works. So the first step is completing and submitting your application and all of the required supporting documentation. Next, the Trails Advisory Board will review, score, and rank the application. Then you will receive a notice of award letter and project agreement from the department. Next, you will attend a mandatory grant administration workshop where we cover the state and federal requirements for the environmental review, project cost, and procurement. Also, at this time, you are allowed to start administering your grant. Then you will begin conducting the environmental review. And click. The National Environmental Policy Act requires a review to make sure your project isn't negatively impacting any resources. Once you complete the environmental review and send us the supporting documentation, we will review the NEPA and send it to the Federal Highways Administration to see if your project qualifies as a categorical exclusion. Federal Highways will contact the tribes and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife. Once all of the information has been acquired, Federal Highways will review and approve the NEPA. At this point, we will send you a letter that says you have the notice to proceed, your project is a categorical exclusion. You may now begin to incur project cost. You cannot incur costs until you have a letter from us that says your project's NEPA has been approved. You can now start requesting reimbursements for expenses that you've incurred throughout the life of the project. So now that we kind of talked about the process itself, how to apply, and what happens after you apply, let me show you where to download the application. The application is on our website and is an electronic fillable form so you can download it. We recommend that you use Adobe for downloading and completing the application. Handwritten applications will not be accepted. 2 hard copies of the final application should be mailed to GMS. The next part of this presentation will be us walking through the grant application step by step and discussing how to answer the application questions. On the first page of the application, question 1, this is the name of the agency or organization requesting the grant. So this is who is actually applying for and will be administering the grant once actually awarded. The receiving official should match the name or title in the resolution and will also be the person signing the application. Question 3, this is the name of the person who prepared the application. So if you hired someone to prepare this application, or if a RPC is helping you, the name of that person would go here. Sometimes it is the same person writing the grant and administering the grant. Along with administering the grant, this person will also need to attend the mandatory administration workshop. If we have questions about the application itself, we are going to call the application preparer. But if we have questions about the grant, we will be contacting the person listed in question 4. Questions 5 through 8 ask about your representatives and Regional Planning Commission. These are the people who may be notified if the grant application is awarded. Question 9 asks site-specific questions where the project is located. For instance, the county, township, range, and section. Also the latitude and longitude. Please use decimal degrees for the latitude and longitude. Questions 10 through 12 ask you to provide information about your organization's background and prior performance with DNR. Pursuant to 2 CFR 200, we are required to conduct a risk assessment of all applicants to ensure that we are being good stewards of taxpayer dollars and that we are only awarding grants to entities that have the capacity to manage the project. If you are selected to move into grant round 2, you will be asked to provide additional information to complete the risk assessment process, such as a copy of your most recent audit and accounting and procurement policies and procedures. These questions should be answered based on the organization listed in question 1. So, for example, if the City of Marion, Missourisville Parks and Recreation Department is the applicant, the information in this section should reflect the department, as opposed to the city as a whole. In question 12, please note that we are asking you to provide performance history information. Oh, what happened? Sorry. For grants received by DNR as a whole and not just the RTP program, which may include LWCF, RTP, HPF, scrap tire, or drinking water grants. Please be sure to provide accurate information regarding previous grants. Also note that this is the first time within the application that points are given to a section. Since we strive to distribute the grants throughout the entire state, a project sponsor who has never received a RTP grant would receive more points than a project sponsor with an active RTP grant. Questions 13 through 22 are the questions that ask you to describe your project. The first one, question 13, ask what category your project falls into. There are 5 categories for projects, which are non-motorized single-use, non-motorized diverse use, both non-motorized and motorized diverse use, and motorized single-use and motorized diverse use. Federal regulations state that for the Recreational Trails Program, we are required to fund projects at a 30-30-40 ratio, meaning 30% for motorized projects, 30% for single use, and 40% of projects must be a diverse use. An example of a non-motorized single use would be a trail open to just walkers, or a water trail that's open to just kayaking and canoeing. An example of a non-motorized diverse use trail would have at least 2 different types of use. For example, a hiking and biking trail or biking and equestrian trail. E-bikes are considered non-motorized. An example of non-motorized and motorized diverse use would be a water trail that you allow kayakers and canoers to use, but also allow boaters with outboard motors to use. Another example would be a trail that you allow ATV use on, as well as making it an equestrian trail. These uses can be seasonally dependent, such as you allow ATVs in the spring, summer, and fall, and allow equestrian in the winter. A motorized single-use project would be if you built an ATV trail and that was the only type of use you allowed on the trail. Motorized diverse use would be if you built a trail that accommodated ATVs and motorbikes. Question 14 asks whether your project is new development or rehabilitation repair of an existing project. Let's say you have a project that's both new development and rehabilitation. For example, you're going to be building a new section of trail, but you're also going to be rehabbing the current trail system. If 60% of your total project costs are for the new construction, then it would be considered a new development. Then the boxes under new development are for new trail construction, new trail site and trailhead amenities, and new trail connectors to existing areas. The same categories exist for the rehab and repair section, which would be for existing trails, existing amenities, and existing connectors. There are also boxes to indicate whether or not you're going to be acquiring property or easements. Questions 15 and 16 ask you where your project is going to be constructed. If the project sponsor owns or leases the property, a deed or lease agreement must be submitted with the application. The lease must be a minimum of 25 years and signature of owner/other interest holder acknowledging a 25-year commitment to maintain an outdoor recreational use. If the project sponsor has a permanent trail easement or a temporary construction easement, a copy of the easement agreement must be submitted as well. Or in the case of projects on state or federal lands, a draft memorandum of agreement between the agencies and sponsor must be submitted. The MOA must commit the land managing agency to maintaining public access to the project for a minimum of 25 years and acknowledging their commitment to record the declaration of deed restriction to the deed of property. The agreement must also give the project sponsor access to construct on the property and must outline the roles and responsibilities for bidding or contracting for any design and construction work involved in the project. If the applicant is a non-for-profit constructing on public land, the landholding agency must also agree to fulfill the 25-year stewardship requirements should the non-for-profit organization dissolve before the end of the stewardship period. If recommended for funding, a signed memorandum of agreement must be executed prior to the award of grant funds. Questions 17 to 18 ask you to list all present, existing, and reasonably anticipated liens or mortgages, or both, on the property, and the effect on the recreational easements that will be required, and if there are any right-of-way easements or revisionary interests associated with the property. Identify outstanding mortgages, loans, amounts still owed, and describe how these will affect the current project. If a loan will be required to complete this grant, please include how much you anticipate borrowing and for what duration. Because the property located within the RTP project will be dedicated to public outdoor recreation use for 25 years, it is important to identify any parties who may have a superior interest. Please list all right-of-way easements, permanent or temporary, or revisionary interest associated with the site. Question 19 asks you to tell us what the intended use of the projects are. Check all that apply. This lets us know whether the trail can accommodate bicycling, walking, jogging, hiking, backpacking, equestrian, canoeing, kayaking, motorized boating, ATV use, etc. Page 18 of the application guide has a definition of each type of use to help you decide what category your project falls under. The Recreational Trails Program prohibits condemnation of any kind of interest in property. Therefore, acquisition or lease of land or right-of-way easements on which to develop a trail project must be from a willing landowner. Additionally, acquisition of real property interests through easement or lease agreement must be for a period of at least 25 years. Provisions stated in the easement or lease agreement cannot be detrimental to the proposed recreational development. The easement or lease agreement must also state that it cannot be revoked at will by the landowner, and that the land must be retained in public trail use for the duration of the easement or lease period. All acquisition of real property with RTP funds, whether through purchase, donation, easement, or lease, must conform with the Uniform Relocation Assistance and Real Property Acquisition Policies Act of 1970, known as the Uniform Act. This act also applies to acquiring property with non-federal funds when the intent is to apply for the RTP funds for development of a trail project. In other words, a project sponsor cannot knowingly circumvent the federal law by acquiring real property with local funds and not follow the regulation of the act, and then apply for RTP funds at a later date to develop trail or trailhead. The Uniform Act ensures that landowners are fully informed of their rights and are justly compensated when selling or leasing private property or selling and leasing any type of interest in the property, such as an easement or a temporary construction easement. As part of this assurance, the Uniform Act requires a Yellow Book appraisal and an appraisal review to be performed. Additionally, the Act also covers the provision of relocation assistance to owners or tenants displaced by the acquisition. Costs that are eligible to be included in the budget under Phase 2 are costs for acquiring property by fee title or the use of property by permanent or temporary easement, and incidental costs including appraisal fees, titles, searches, preparation of surveys, plats, and property descriptions. It is important to remember that if you know you will need a temporary construction easement, land acquisition, or permanent trail easement, that you do not acquire this land until you receive the award, and that the right-of-way has been approved by federal highways. These next two slides show an example of the declaration of deed restriction that will be placed on the deeds of the property where the trail or trailhead will be located if you are awarded a grant. Note that you will be including a copy of the legal description of the trail corridor as part of this declaration. For project sponsor that will be constructing on property that they do not own, this is what the land holding agency will need to agree to in order to record to the deed in the MOA. A copy of the declaration can be found on the RTP website. Question 20 is the title of your project with the current phase. We are asking for a very short but descriptive title because this is how we will refer to your project on correspondences, the agreement, notice to proceed letters, etc. Question 21 is where you should provide a full scope of work for your project. Tell us specifically what is being constructed, repaired, and or acquired. Is this a new project? One phase of a larger project? What exactly do you plan to accomplish with this grant, and how do you plan to accomplish it? The narrative should talk about the project limits. For a trail, we want to know where does it start and where does it end? What type of trail surface material will be present? How long will it be? How wide? Is this a spur to an existing trail? Is this for repairs or new construction? Or is this for amenities? When I read this section of the application, I should be able to tell that you have a well thought out and detailed project. You should make it very clear what is being constructed in this phase of the project. Discuss the current phase first, and at the end, briefly explain what will be done in future phases. Here is a bad example of a project narrative. We plan to build an additional 2.1 miles of concrete trail in Trail City, Missouri as an extension to the Wolf Creek Trail. Here's a good example. The existing Wolf Creek Trail is a 7.5-mile trail that stretches from Wolf Creek Park, located at 1001 Wolf Creek Avenue, Missouriville, Missouri, to Trail Park, 200 Hiking Avenue, Trail City, Missouri. We're requesting funding to complete the final phase of this trail project, which will add an additional 2.1 miles of 8 feet wide paved concrete trail and extend the trail from its current terminus in Trail Park to Trail City's public school at 100 Main Street. A map of the project area has been included to show both the existing trail and the proposed trail extension. If awarded, the funding will be used to hire an engineer to design the trail to comply with the Americans with Disabilities Act and oversee the construction. Grant funds will be used to pay for the materials to construct the trail signage, and safety lighting. Trail City plans to use its in-house construction crew to construct the trail. We intend to remove 20 trees and will replace these trees with a 1-to-1 ratio of native species. Question 22 asks you to explain who the project is going to benefit and why the project is needed. This is really the opportunity to demonstrate to the Trails Advisory Board the merit of this project. How is the project beneficial and what will it provide to users? Is there a targeted group that the project will be most beneficial to? Does it fill a need for an underserved segment of the population? Does it link 2 or more communities or provide a connection to a park or another trail? Will it provide benefits beyond trail use, such as acts of wildlife corridor or protect a riparian corridor? Will it assist with increasing economic development to a local or regional area? Are there any unique features or aspects to the project? Does it have any special natural or cultural historical elements? Will it connect to a national historic trail or a national recreation area? Will it connect to a long distance trail such as the Katy Trail? Is there any urgency to completing this project? Will the project be addressing a public health and safety issue? Will it be addressing an environmental issue? Will it be addressing a compliance issue? Is there a time-sensitive aspect to the project, such as an eminent land? Question 23 is asking how this project meets a need identified in a local, regional, or statewide management plan. Make sure to include a copy of the section that describes and identifies a need of the master plan with your supporting documentation. Also take the time to describe how this project aligns with a SCORP priority. The Statewide Comprehensive Outdoor Recreation Plan, SCORP, is a 5-year planning document that identifies outdoor recreation use of statewide significance and evaluates the supply of and demand for outdoor recreation resource and trail needs throughout Missouri. The SCORP can be found on our website. I recommend you look at pages 73 to 76 and identify which goal and objective your project will be meeting. State the goal number and explain how the project will meet the objective. Question 24. Another really important part of the section is if you've solicited public opinion in your community in regards to the trail project. This can be illustrated to us in a number of different ways. Maybe you've held a public meeting or maybe a Facebook poll. These results may demonstrate that there is a need or a demand for the project. Make sure to include a copy of the documents that show you completed the public engagement, such as flyers, meeting minutes, sign-in sheets, results of polls, etc. Question 25 asks you to identify which accessibility standards are being addressed and to describe accessibility challenges that exist and how you plan to overcome them. You should indicate how the project meets the ADA, ABA, U.S. Access Board, and USFS standards. Explain any challenges that impact your ability to comply with these standards and how the project's design will overcome the challenges. For projects that use RTP funding for the development of trailhead amenities such as restrooms, parking areas, access routes, shelters, drinking fountains, etc., these facilities must be ADA compliant. For your convenience, an accessibility checklist has been posted on the RTP website that provides the ADA design standards for the most common trailhead-related amenities. Project sponsors should consult with a design professional for further assistance to ensure ADA, ABA, U.S. Access Board compliance standards are met. It may not be practical to implement accessibility standards for your trail development project as opposed to a trailhead development project. However, you are still encouraged to consider providing access to the greatest extent possible for your project. There are several conditions or exceptions that may preclude making a trail accessible. For instance, a trail's intended user group may make it impossible to design and construct a trail that is considered accessible. A mountain bike trail is a good example of this. Below are links to the ADA requirements. On page 20 to 21 of the OPSP, there are resources for accessibility guidance for developing trails other than for pedestrian use. Question 26 asks, how will this project add value to your trails and what is the current role of trails in your community? We want to know how this project will enhance the area and what it would mean to develop this project. How will this project impact the community? Question 27, ask what contributing design elements have been considered in regards to preserving environmental resources. For example, will you be adding a native wildflower area for native species to forage and use? We want you to describe what steps you will take to avoid impacts to cultural, historical resources or threatened and endangered species. Will you be taking steps to try and prevent the spread of invasive species, such as planting native landscapes? What steps will you take to be a good neighbor, like minimizing trespassing? If in your project area an environmental review has occurred, include a copy of the full report with the application. You should summarize the results of the report, such as, this agency completed an environmental review of the project area and determined that there were no impacts. Question 28 asks you to describe what sustainability considerations you would address with the project. For instance, the choosing of the trail location, minimizing degradation and erosion, or energy conservation such as solar lights. Question 29 asks what safety concerns you will be addressing in your project, such as appropriate trail width, adequate sight lines at trail crossings, overhead clearance, lighting, trail signs, vehicle barriers, etc. Question 30 asks about construction and rehabilitation projects and who will be doing the work in each phase. If you intend to use in-house labor for the construction of the project, submit a cost analysis that compares in-house labor to contract labor. In order to approve the use of in-house labor, you must demonstrate that in-house or volunteer labor is more cost-effective than contracted labor. If you intend to hire an engineer for design, construction, oversight, etc., this should be listed. Detail out who will be performing each phase of the project. Do not list specific vendors because you will need to follow proper procurement and bidding procedures. Question 31 asks you to provide a detailed post-completion plan for your project. Project sponsors are required to maintain all RTP construction projects for public access for a minimum of 25 years. This question is designed to demonstrate that you have the resources planned and available and a long-term care plan. Question 32 to 33 ask you to talk about partnerships, donors, and contributions that would be associated with your project. For example, several grant recipients use AmeriCorps, Girl Scouts, or Boy Scouts. An example would be having an AmeriCorps group help with a portion of building a trail, or having an Eagle Scout build your trail kiosk. Question 33 asks you to list donors and contributions pertaining to your project. This should be third-party donations from somebody else. Only list donors who are contributing in a truly tangible way. The project applicant cannot be a donor or a contributor. Do not list vendors who are promising discounts on products or services. You will need to provide letters of commitment from each donor stating, yes, we do intend to commit a donation of this if this project is funded, and this is the value of our donation. The total of the donation listed here should equal the total of donation in question 35, the budget table. If you're using federal funds or another federal grant as match for this grant, you will need to list it here. You will also need to include in the supporting documentation the statute or regulation that allows you to use these funds as match for the RTP grant. ARPA funds cannot be used as match for the RTP grant. Question 34 asks what financial assurances you had to complete the project in 3 years. This is a reimbursable grant, so you will need upfront cash to begin the project and enough manpower to finish the project. Supporting documentation includes letters of commitment or intent to donate from partners, resolution, and a financial assurance letter. A template for the resolution and financial assurance letter can be found on page 9 of the application guide. In question 35, we are asking you to provide a cost estimate for your project broken down into 3 phases. You need to make sure that the table and narrative equal each other and that everything listed in the scope of work, question 21, is listed in the budget narrative. The donation column should match the total from question 33. It is very important to make sure that your budget is accurate. Phase 1 is for planning, engineering, and environmental review expenditures. This includes costs associated with your environmental review process, such as archaeological or cultural resource survey, and costs associated with designing your project, such as engineering and the development of bid documents. Only 10% of the total project budget can be for cost in phase 1. Phase 2 asks for costs associated with the right-of-way, such as temporary construction easements, the purchase or donation of land, and appraisals. Phase 3 should include all costs associated with construction, such as labor, materials, and equipment usage. Make sure to break your cost down by column. If it is a cost that you're asking the grant to pay for, place this amount in column 1. If you, as the project sponsor, are paying the cost, place this amount in column 2. Or if it is a contribution made by a third-party donor, place this amount in column 3. In each of these columns, only use whole numbers, no decimals or commas. The percentage at the bottom will self-calculate and tell you what percent of funding is matching share funds. The percentage must be a minimum of 20%. Be aware that your project will be funded at the cost share ratio submitted in your application. So if you write the application for a 60-40 split, if you are awarded the project, the percentage you will be reimbursed is based off of what is submitted in the budget. If the costs come in under budget, funding on the matching share portion cannot be reduced on its own. Both the federal award and matching share will be reduced proportionally. If there are costs in the grant request column, each phase of the project should be split by the same matching share percentage. If the cost is only matched in phase 1, it will not be split by the percentage. For example, if you have design work that will be procured after the award, and it is $10,000, if your matching share percentage is 60-40, then $6,000 would be under the grant request in phase 1, and $4,000 would be under the project sponsor. But if the engineering firm is donating their time to design the project, then all $10,000 would be in the donation by third-party column. If the design is being completed by your city engineer, which is match only, it would be placed under the project sponsor column. Question 36 is asking you to give as a detailed budget of the project by phase. All costs listed in the budget table should be listed in the budget narrative. Don't list what the grant is paying for. You need to include the donation and project sponsor match. Remember that cost in question 36 should equal the cost in question 35. Also remember that if you listed it in the project narrative, it should be listed in the budget narrative. In the project schedule column, Note the time frame for completion of each phase and include the estimated completion date in month and year for each part, assuming a start date of October 15th, 2025. For phase 1, the expenditures have been broken out by environmental, engineering, and other, and the table has been filled out so you can see what it looks like. Do not specify any vendors or brand names in your estimate. If awarded, you will be required to follow a competitive bidding process. If any of the costs in phase 1 are pre-award costs or donations, make sure to include the information in the narrative. Pre-award costs can only be for costs incurred up to 18 months prior to the construction authorization date from when the application is submitted. Build America, Buy America. Projects with a federal award of $500,000 or less, the U.S. DOT issued a public interest waiver for Buy America requirements effective 8/16/23 for specific projects of $500,000 or less, subject to the following limitations. The waiver is from Buy America requirements for de minimis costs and small grants to prepare for full compliance with the bill's new Made in America standards for construction materials. The public interest waiver of BABA's domestic preference is for projects funded under DOT administered financial assistance programs, including the Recreational Trails Program, administered in Missouri by the Missouri Department of Natural Resources, for iron, steel, manufactured products, and construction materials under a single financial assistance award for which the total amount of federal financial assistance applied to the project through awards or subawards is below $500,000. The waiver is applicable only to awards that are obligated or subawards that are made on or after the effective date of the waiver 8/16/23. This is a table showing eligible costs that you can list in your budget table and your project narrative. This information is in the OPSP on pages 23 to 26. Costs incurred up to 18 months prior to project approval can be used as match, such as planning cost. You can use those pre-award costs as part of your match. If the costs were incurred prior to the projected start date, provide the date of completion for the expense. For in-house equipment use the most recent FEMA schedule of rates to determine the hourly rate for each piece of equipment. Include the 4-digit code for the schedule of rates. Ineligible costs can be found on page 26 of the application guide. Ineligible costs include routine trail maintenance, which includes work that should be conducted on a frequent basis in order to keep a trail in its originally constructed state, such as mowing, tree and brush pruning, leaf and debris removal, cleaning and repair of culverts, overhead costs that include regular operating expenses such as building, rent and upkeep, utilities, insurance, and fixed costs associated with business, agency, or group, law enforcement costs, construction of non-eligible sidewalks, and budget contingencies. If you are unsure if a cost is allowable, you can check 2 CFR 200 subpart E. Cost principles for eligible and ineligible costs for federal grants and the Federal Highways RTP website. In the last section, you will see something called discretionary board criteria. This section provides up to 10 points that may be used by the Missouri Trails Advisory Board at their discretion. This assessment allows board members to bring their specific knowledge of statewide and local recreation patterns, resources, and needs into consideration. Members may award points based on their subjective evaluation of the project application. The supporting documentation checklist is provided on the application as an aid to project sponsors and should be completed before submitting the application packet. For a detailed summary of each required item on the checklist, go to the instructions in the OPSP on page 7 to 8. For the state and federally verified, please make sure to complete the business entity form found on page 11 to 14. You will want to make sure to provide the completed business entity form, including affidavit of work authorization and e-verify documentation. If your project is on public land and you will need to provide a draft of a memorandum of agreement. If your project is recommended for funding, a signed memorandum of agreement will have to be executed at a later date in the project process. Also note that there are 2 different types of maps in the checklist. You should include a specific location map and an aerial photo map. Also, templates for the resolution and financial assurance letter can be found in the guide on pages 9. Here's an example of a project map. The Greenway Park and Hold Summit has their map overlaid on an aerial photo, so they only needed to provide one map as it served as a dual purpose. The certification of responsible person is the signature section. A responsible official of the project of the sponsor's agency must sign and date this section to complete the application or the application is ineligible and will not be scored. Examples of responsible officials include mayors, city managers or administrators, directors, presidents, executive officers, or chief financial officers. This is the person who should be named in the resolution provided with the application. The responsible official does not need to be the contact person listed on the application, but does need to read the application and have an understanding of the requirements of administering the grant should one be awarded. The responsible official cannot be an independent grant writer who is not affiliated with the agency or organization and cannot currently be serving as a board member on the Trails Advisory Board. An incomplete or inaccurate application packet will be ineligible for scoring. Handwritten applications will not be scored. The final step is to mail in 2 hard copies of the application and supporting documentation. Application packets must be submitted or postmarked on or before March 3rd, 2025. So that's the end of the presentation. If you have any questions, please add them to the chat box or feel free to come off of mute to ask your questions.
This is Michelle Smith. I have a question.
Sure, go ahead.
Hi. You mentioned, can you still hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Sure. Thank you. You mentioned not too long ago in the webinar a variation in cost share ratio. For example, if you pledged 40% and the costs were under budget and so forth, could you take a little bit more time with that and maybe give an example?
Sure. So go back to that page. So it's referring to if, say, you requested 250,000 in the grant column, and then you match 250,000. And so for a total of 500,000 total project cost. So you are a percent of matching funds 50-50. But say that's what you were awarded. Well, then when bids came in or as the project progressed, you realized, oh, we over budgeted. We aren't going to need this much. We can't just take away off the matching side. It has to come off the matching side and the grant side.
Okay, but it could come off of both sides.
Yes. So it's not saying that, hey, you can't have money remaining. It's not saying that. If there's money remaining, though, all of it, goes back. It's the grant side goes back and the matching side. So basically, whenever a reimbursement is submitted, every time we're going to divide it by that matching share. So it'll be 50% is match and 50% is grant. And so we're always going to look at whatever percent of matching funds you submitted your application at. If you come in under budget, whatever is left over at the end of the project will just be returned.
Okay, so really the matching whatever you pledge to match, that is
set in stone.
That is the standard. That is set in stone. You could be under budget, you could be over budget, but you still have to stay committed to your pledge in terms of the percentage.
Correct. And so say if it was over budget and you requested 250,000 and so you're already over your federal amount that you can request, that means that you have to make up for that in the cash match or donations or somewhere else. So we have had projects that have been over and we've had projects that have been under. Typically they're right around what they're pretty good at estimates we've gotten. You have to account for increase in everything, obviously, because if this project isn't awarded till October, prices change.
Okay. Thank you. I've got another question. I've just got to find my note. Uh, early in the beginning of the webinar, you used, when you were talking about who was writing the grant,
Mm-hmm.
and you said, well, if you contract with someone to write the grant, or if so and so writes your grant, and it was initials AR something. What does that stand for?
RPC.
Say that again, please.
RPC, Regional Planning Commission.
Oh, MRPC. I was hearing I was hearing that it started with an A. Gotcha. No, MRPC, I understand.
Yep. So that's just sometimes cities or counties have RPCs help them write the application, but they're not involved in the rest of the project. So we just want to know who put the application together. That way, if we have a question about, hey, why does this specifically say this, we can go to the person that wrote the application.
Yeah, thank you.
So I have a question about project starting time and moving into the project. So we're building a trail system, and we were planning on applying for restroom, parking lot, and signage. Um, so did we hear you correct that you have to wait till you're awarded and then you go through the bid process to do that stuff? So could we put down a temporary parking lot and a temporary bathroom to open in March, and then if we are awarded in October, then we can go through and work towards permanent solutions?
What do you mean temporary?
Like dirt parking lot and a outhouse, Johnny on the spot, as far as temporary. Because we were
So go ahead.
we were hoping to get people riding the trails this spring, but we want to have permanent solutions. The Planning and Zoning Commission has granted us 18 months lead time.
Yeah, so
Parking.
I'll give you my answer, and then if Brian Evans with Federal Highways wants to add to it, he can. So our concern is that we don't want any environmental work being done ahead of time, because you're disturbing that area. And so we can't say what was there before you did things. And so when you say dirt work, that's environmental work being done. And so those are things that would make a project ineligible.
Gotcha.
Brian, if you want to add to that.
Also, I would just say that anything that you do before a grant is awarded, you cannot seek any kind of reimbursement on. So if you went out there and did work, you cannot ask for reimbursement of anything because we do not have an executed grant obligating funds for that work.
Gotcha.
Okay. Thank you.
I know there are several handicapped accessible sites to look at. And for a mixed use trail, I just wondered if there was a general rule of thumb in terms of the width of a trail, if it was going to be used for both hiking or both walking and biking.
Brian, I'm going to defer to you, since you kind of see the MoDOT project and RTP projects.
Can you repeat that?
So we have a trail that we need to rehabilitate, and it's certainly open to bicyclists. Its primary use is for walking. If we wanted to ensure that it was available as a mixed use trail, what would be what's the minimum width of a trail?
Like 5 foot. I think it was like 5 foot.
Yeah, I typically like RTP wise, we'll see 6 or greater, most are 8. But we RTP, the RTP program doesn't have like a hey, it has to be this wide at a minimum. You know, when it comes in, we look at that, and that's where Federal Highways takes a look at it too, to make sure that it's going to accommodate what you're requesting.
Right. And then the application also asks, if you are, intentions are like ADA accessible, all that, generally you're asked, well, what guidance are you using? Those are different guidance standards out there.
Yeah, and one
Federal
of the
Highway's in the process of adopting the PROAG, but that's not done yet. So I think eventually PROAG is what FHWA will be the standards for federal highway.
And pro ACT, can you give me the, can you spell that out?
PROWAG,
KROWAT. Okay.
public right of way access guidance.
Okay.
I think that's the correct.
And if you look at the accessibility checklist on the website, it kind of has the general or standards that we look at a lot that say, okay, if it's a diverse use or if it's going to be ADA, then it has to be this wide. If it's not this wide, then every so many feet, it has to have a spot where you can rest, a rest area.
Okay.
We are when we see a trail trying to be ADA compliant or having ADA standards, we like to see that an engineer is involved to make sure that everything is being done properly and that those standards are being met.
Okay. How many grant applications did you receive last year?
22, I think. We are 25 and below.
Yeah.
Usually we're 25 or below. A couple years ago when we opened our grant round up to equipment purchase and some other things, that's when we saw a record year of close to 30. But typically we're between like 20 and 25.
And I did see in the application that if you purchase equipment, it has to be dedicated to the use for this trail, correct?
Correct. So you can't purchase a Bobcat and go use it on city streets or clearing out culverts or things like that. And the equipment, it has its own application. It's the last 2 pages of the regular application.
I have a question.
Sure.
On the current slide, I think the next slide, regarding phase 1, I think I saw some pre-award costs listed in that sample.
Mm-hmm.
Could those pre-award costs be the NEPA?
Yeah, that's up here where the environmental is.
That's what that is?
Yeah, so the NEPA is environmental. And so that's for saying, so say you have an RPC to your NEPA, you could put that cost up there. Or if you know, like you're going to have a survey done, you could put those survey costs up there. And so those aren't typically pre-award because you cannot start any work until your project's awarded. So those would be after. The only thing that can be pre-award is if you did engineering work ahead of time, or if you recently had a project that is in the same area that you already had a survey done on. But it still has to be within 18 months of the project award, and it can only be used for match. It can't be reimbursed.
If NEPA is required to get the grant
NEPA's
moving and it's also not pre-award, how does that timeline work out?
So have you done the LWCF program?
No.
Okay, so with the LWCF program, you have to complete the NEPA before you apply. And you have to submit it with the application. With RTP, the environmental and the NEPA are done after the project is awarded. So if the project is awarded in October, then you would start working and get your NEPA done, say November, December. So that's where that column that says project schedule is. So you could start working on it that same year, but it might not get approved. The NEPA might not get approved until, say, the beginning of 2026. It just depends on if a survey is needed. The tribes get a minimum of 30 days to review it. So you get the NEPA done, it gets to me. I review it and approve it. I send it to Federal Highways. Federal Highway sends it off to tribes and U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and they get a minimum of 30 days to comment on it.
And all that would be after the award has been given, but before the grant agreement has been executed. Is that right?
No.
No.
So in October, when you are awarded the project, you're gonna get the financial assistance agreement known as the FAA, which is the agreement between DNR and the project sponsor. And once that's signed and we have the other documents we need, then we provide you with a letter that says you now have the notice of award and notice to proceed with the environmental and preliminary engineering of the project. And so once you receive that notice to proceed, notice to award letter, you have been awarded the project and you can proceed with the NEPA.
Okay, thank you.
If we could go back to equipment, you just touched on that. I heard you say that
Sure.
as long as the equipment is used for the intended use of the project, then that would make it eligible. So like if our trail builder, he rents a mini excavator and a skid steer, and we have, we have a big piece of property that we want to put 30 miles of trails on. So it's going to take quite a long time. Is that, so would that be eligible equipment? Because we could use that for honestly 25 years, building as many trails as we want to get done over time.
No. I say no because the way you're talking about is like if you're budgeting for maintenance or for building 25 years, like you're wanting us to pay 25 years down the road. And so you're wanting us to pay it as it goes. What we can pay for is if you bought a piece of machinery to develop these trails, maintain the trails. That's what we can pay for. Or if you already had a piece of machinery that you own, you wanted to trade it, or you needed to do some maintenance to it to continue the work that it does, we can pay for that. So chainsaws, hedge trimmers, UTVs, skid loaders, bobcats, things like that we can pay for as long as it's a justified expense that is directly related to the trail. So
yeah, that's what I meant. That's how I meant it.
Well, you said he leases it.
Well, yeah, but we would like to, I'm saying if we can have our own equipment that we can then let, have the trail builder use specifically to build trails and maintain trails.
Yeah. Okay. So if you applied, say for a bobcat and a bucket, to build 10 miles of trail, we can pay for that. And then that Bobcat has to be used for trail work
Yeah.
that we developed and then other trail related stuff. It just can't go off, essentially not doing trail related stuff
Right. Okay.
because it was paid for with federal money.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And then if it was ever disposed of before 25 years, we have to be notified and we have to give you permission to dispose of the property.
Gotcha. And same would hold true if we trade it for a newer machine
Yes.
down the road. Okay.
Yes. And
Okay.
so you have the title because you purchase it, but there's going to be a caveat on there, in audits and all of that says, this was paid for by federal funds and it can only be disposed of in this manner.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Jenna had 2 questions in the chat. I'm not sure if we covered those, so I'll go ahead and read them out. 2 hard copies of additional documents as well, question mark.
Yes. So you for sure have to submit 2 hard copies of the application, and then we'd like to see 2 hard copies of the application documents because there's more than one person looking at them, and so they have to be in more than one spot. However, if you have like 100 pages of deeds, then you can just make a note that you sent 1 copy of it. Definitely feel free to make it double-sided when you send it. Don't staple it. Don't put it in a binder. I don't want to say don't waste your time, but essentially you don't need to do any of that because what's going to happen is when it gets to us, we scan it. So all your hard work, I'm going to undo. And the reason we can't accept it electronically is because our emails can't accept files that large.
Okay, Jenna, if you have a follow-up question on that, feel free to come off mute or put that in the chat box. Okay, she said thank you. And then the second question is, would outdoor fitness equipment or stations be eligible for grant reimbursement?
Yes, I currently have 1 project that is doing outdoor fitness equipment in St. Louis, and we had one a couple years ago in that Community Opportunity did in Troy, Missouri. So those are actually listed in the SCORP, I believe, as part of like an objective.
Great, and that is it for the questions in the chat box at this time.
I got another one back on the equipment thing. So sorry. If
No, you're good.
So could us personally or our nonprofit, which is the trails are all nonprofit, could one of either us personally or the nonprofit go finance equipment and then submit for reimbursement?
Only a non-for-profit can apply for the program.
Right. Yeah, that's okay. That's us. So if
So
we went and bought
you're saying
equipment,
where the money came from? Like if you
well,
loaned yourself?
Correct. Well, if we raised some money to go buy a skid steer, and then could we apply for reimbursement having it already been purchased?
No.
So it would. Okay.
So you have you can't purchase it until, okay, so back to the notice to proceed, notice of award. With equipment purchase, there's not a NEPA, and so that process is a little quicker. So then as soon as we get through that process of saying, hey, a NEPA is not required because of X, Y, and Z, and then we give you the notice to proceed with bidding out your project, because if it's over 25,000, then you have to follow proper procurement. And so if it's over that amount, then you have to go out for a public bid. And so there's still the procurement processes that you have to follow. And if you were to pay for it yourself, then that would be cash match.
Okay.
Because it's essentially kind of like a donation. It gets kind of hairy in there. essentially, and it makes it really
Okay.
tricky.
Okay.
Now, if you said, hey, we would have to have a short-term loan from the bank, that would be different.
Hmm.
But you couldn't do it ahead of time. You would have
No,
to
you
be
cannot
out.
purchase it ahead of time.
Okay.
That kind of goes back to needing to have a executed agreement approving the funding for it.
Okay.
So anything purchased, work done, anything done
Yep.
before we have that agreement is not eligible for reimbursement.
So what you don't want to happen is you purchase it and then your project not be awarded.
Right. Right.
That's that's essentially in the long run what we're trying to prevent. And so that's why we wait. With equipment purchases, the projects do go a lot quicker. I have 2 equipment purchase projects going on right now. And so now they're going quicker since we kind of have a method of how we're doing it, because we just started opening equipment purchases back up 2 years ago. So it took us a little bit to figure out kind of the process we wanted to do. But those projects are typically done within a year or so.
Okay.
Essentially, no, you cannot do anything until you have an agreement.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. What were you gonna? Okay. Thank you.
Anyone else? All right. So there's no further questions. That's the end of this workshop. If you have any questions, feel free to email me directly or that MSP grants. It'll get to me, or you can give me a call. If you have any questions ahead of time for the application, feel free to email or call. Otherwise, I will wait till I see all the applications come in. And then this is being recorded. So probably within the next 2 weeks, it'll get posted to the RTP website where the application and the OPSP/instructions are posted. All right. Well, that's it.